Welcome, everyone, to the White Rabbit podcast. I am your co-host, Matt Kraus, coming to you from Barcelona, Turkey. Your other
Barcelona,
co-host,
Turkey. Okay, that's
wishful
okay.
thinking.
Speaking about Third World War, that's a long shot, but okay.
Wishful thinking. Okay, no, I'm not in Barcelona, Turkey. I'm in Bandurma, Turkey. Your other co-host, Alper is actually
in Bandurma, Spain. Yes.
He's in Bandurma, Spain. No, he is actually in Barcelona, Spain. So he is in Barcelona. And so, Alper, we have a repeat guest on the podcast today, Wes Wheless. Wes, welcome back to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
So, yeah, good to see you again. I'm in Seattle, United Kingdom. All right.
Seattle, United Kingdom. Yes. Okay. So Wes was he was a guest on the podcast back in May, so about 6 months ago. And recently, he and I were talking about a business pivot that he made at one point. And I thought, this story is about general business principles, but it also has a lot to do with presentations. So we should discuss this on the podcast. And that's what brings us here today. But before we dive into that main topic for today, let me introduce Wes a bit to our listeners who didn't catch that earlier episode that he was on. Wes lives in my adopted town of Seattle, Washington, or, as we established earlier, Seattle, United Kingdom, so Seattle, Washington, where he has that most meta of jobs, consultant to consultants. Specifically, he helps consultants distill the message that they are sending out into the world, and then to represent that message visually. And Wes will be the first to tell you that he is not a visual artist, but I have seen his work, and I can vouch for the fact that he has a unique talent for doing this. And in fact, the visual representations that he does tend to be so clear that it's like getting hit with a lightning bolt. And all of a sudden, within microseconds, you can understand exactly what one of his clients is doing. Wes also puts out a newsletter called The Light Bulb, and that's a newsletter that I read religiously and highly recommend to people. So, okay, Wes, before we get started, help me wrap up this intro. Is there anything here that our audience should know about you, but that I forgot to mention?
No, I think you did a good job. Thanks for the kind words, as always. I'll add a little bit more color as we get into the story, as it makes sense there. But no, I think that's great.
Okay.
I'll add a small point to that.
Go for it.
We did the last recording almost half a year ago, and I still remember very vividly the skiing down skier that we talked about. So within those 180 plus days, the fact that it's still very clearly vivid on my mind, I think it tells a lot. I mean, on my mind, because it tends to forget things.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that too. It's like that visual of the guy coming down the ski ramp and then running into the Grim Reaper.
Yeah.
I think that image will stick with me for the rest of my life. So good job, Wes.
Thank you. That's the hope, is we create these kinds of visuals that get very, very sticky in folks' minds. So yeah, thanks.
So Wes, one thing before we get started, if our listeners want to get in touch with you after the podcast, where can they find you?
Yeah, if you want to learn more about the process I go through with clients about creating visuals out of your expertise, then you can go to intellectualheadshots.com. And if you're interested in the newsletter that Matt mentioned, you can just go to lightbulbemail.com.
Okay, thanks, Wes. Let's dive into the main topic for today. But first, let me give our listeners a heads up on what we're going to be talking about today and what it has to do with the theme of this podcast, presentations. So Wes is going to talk to us today about some pivots or some changes that he had to go through in his business to improve the match between what he was offering and who he was offering it to. And you might ask, what does any of this have to do with presentations? And it's this. In a presentation, there are two things to look out for. One is, does my message fit my audience? And that's a pretty tried and true subject in the presentation world. You'll hear us presentation trainers talking about that all the time. We say it over and over. Does the message fit the audience? Does the message fit the audience? But then there's another, even more basic question, and that is, am I talking to the right people in the first place? And that question, is less talked about in the presentation world, but perhaps it's even more fundamental. After all, the point of a presentation is to affect change in some way, or to cause change of some sort to happen. And if you're talking to the wrong audience, you can talk until you're blue in the face, but you're never going to get anywhere. For example, let's say that you want to talk about the company's strategic direction. That's all you think about. You wake up in the morning and the first thought you have is about the company's strategic direction. But then you go to some line workers and you try presenting to them about the company's strategic direction. And they're like, dude, that's nice and all, but what are we going to do about it? So that's what I want you to take away from this conversation today about Wes's story. And that's the necessity of thinking about your presentation from both angles, not just the first one. Not just, have I tweaked my message to match the audience, but the second question, is this even the right audience in the first place? Okay, Wes, so start us out. Maybe just back up a bit and give us some context. Give us some big picture stuff. Like, what were you doing? What did your audience actually need? Why was it working? Stuff like that. Just set the stage for us a bit.
Sure. So I'll go back. First disclaimer is what we're talking about happened in 2022, 2023. So you can consider this kind of the pre-Chat GPT era. We'll be talking about, I used to do course writing. And so you can see how that would look a lot different now than it did 3 years ago. But just wanted to kind of set that time benchmark. But first, for people who didn't listen to the last one, I'll just give a tiny bit of my background as it relates to what I was selling when I first started out independently. And that is that I started out as a strategy consultant. I was at a big consulting firm right out of the gate. And then I spent more than half of my corporate career in the tech world. I was a product manager at Expedia. My time there, I ended up building a course and started traveling around teaching product managers, which was a lot of fun. But that all set me up for my last corporate role, which was at a startup called Reforge. And if you're in product management, you probably heard of them. But if you haven't heard of them, what we were doing at Reforge was essentially building like the masterclass of the tech community. So if masterclass can go get big celebrities and Hillary Clinton and Mark Cuban to go teach classes, we would do that at a different scale. We would go find kind of the rock star people in product management and engineering and build courses out of their expertise.
There are several words you don't usually hear in the same sentence, I assume.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right.
But it's fascinating that they exist.
Yeah, definitely. And I think became more and more a thing post-COVID as everyone kind of moved their personas online and we're building individual brands. And so we were building off of that. It was a really interesting job, great job. I was sitting and talking to experts all day and turning their expertise into frameworks and courses. It was pretty intense. But I'll tell you the two things that I took out of my time at Reforge. One is I knew what really good courses, really good content look like. We were in teams of, 8 to 10 people working on each course for 3 to 6 months. We were spending, I don't know if this is public, we were spending upwards of $1 million just to get a course out. And we were profitable. So it was really interesting to see what it takes to do it well and that it can come out really great at the other side. And we developed a reputation for high quality content. That's one. More at a micro level, I really honed my skill of being able to talk to an expert pull out their expertise into frameworks and turn it into something that's monetizable and shareable. The metaphor, I never used this one before. It just came to me this morning. Though it's like if I'm going with you into your attic and organizing it and kind of finding like the old things that you forgot about and coming out and pulling them out and let's take them to market. That's essentially what I was doing with executives and really honed that skill. The output obviously was courses, but the skill underneath it was the extraction and the synthesis. And you'll see why that was important in a second. So all of that happens. I do that for 2 years. The tech downturn comes. I get hit by layoff like a lot of other people at our company. So I take a break, but then I start thinking, okay, this is the time to do independent work. And fortunate enough for me, I started getting inbounds specifically about people saying, I want to build a Reforge quality course, but for my own company. So the idea is, our CEO has a lot to say on this topic, but people don't really know him or her. Can we build a course about that? I'll walk you through an example of a climate tech company I was working with that they had just had a really high profile hire from the SEC here in the US. Can we build a course about what she knows about carbon regulations? So that kind of thing, which was very much in my skill set. They wanted a course. And so I had these inbounds coming in. And it sort of sent me on my way. Before I go into the mismatch, are you with me so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that's all great. People are coming to me. They need a course. I can write courses. They know that I used to work somewhere that built high quality ones. In the first client that I worked with, I'll tell you that some of the mismatch started showing up like right away in our negotiations, even before we started working together. We had a real friendly conversation, and had a friendly relationship. This is not to dog on this client at all. This was a really great project ultimately. But they told me what they needed. I told them what I could do. And then inevitably the question comes, what's your rate? And specifically, they asked me, what's my hourly rate? I had never had to quote that before, but I had anticipated the question. So I tossed out something that I thought was commiserate with my experience and what I was paid before, and also like how much effort I thought it would take.
You mean you tossed out a number or a response?
Did I?
When you say you tossed out something like in the shape of a number? Or
a number, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I gave them a number. I don't exactly remember what it was, but I certainly remember that they came back almost immediately and said, wow, that's double what we pay content writers. And so all of this was happening really quickly. Also, mind you, this was my first time like trying to get a contract or some sort of freelance work. And they knew that too. And so I remember this was a Friday. It was seeming like that was going to be kind of an impasse. Like, here's what I need. They're saying that's like double what we could pay. So we decided to say, okay, I'll take the weekend. Let me put together a firm proposal for you. And then we can like come back on Monday and talk about it. So in that weekend, I realized I needed to change the narrative. I needed to reframe the conversation away from that hourly rate, but into something else. So what did I ended up doing, aside from reading all of Jonathan Stark's work about how to get away from our hourly billing, is I put a deck together and started with, well, I looked at three things and I remember it as PVC. So it was, what's my process, what's the value, and then what's the compensation. And so from the process piece, I put together a slide that just mapped out, I have a 3-step process to get to a really high quality output. One is extraction. The next one is synthesis of insights into frameworks and IP. And the last one is packaging, which is getting us into course form and doing the actual writing. So even that started to reframe the conversation of, okay, you were comparing me to content writers. Here's a picture that shows you that writing piece that you're asking for is just one part of this larger puzzle. To get to something really good, we need to go through that extraction and synthesis phase, and it's going to take time and some special skill. So that was one reframe. that led nicely into, all right, let's talk about value. And so I wanted to make sure that we were, this is not to put down the content writers they were working with. I met them throughout the course of our engagement. They're really great writers. But what we were trying to create in this course was much more detailed and required a lot more digging. So I wanted to show that the value of all that is not just the value that you could expect from an article that you would post or push out on LinkedIn, but the value is probably more like we're going to onboard enterprise clients for this climate tech company. What does one subscription of that look like? And when we think about that, then maybe that's the frame of reference that we should be talking about when it comes to how much you'll pay me to create the course for you. So that was that reframe of value. And that then led into the C of that PVC part, which was the compensation. We're like, okay, well, now with that in mind, let's talk about the value of the project, and let's talk about a flat rate project. If you want to divide it out into hourly, I can maybe give you an hourly estimate, but let's talk about the total cost. And then reframe the fee that way. So that's a kind of a long explanation of how I reframed that story, but that ended up to a much more productive conversation. And it wasn't about, okay, we need a writer, here's our writer rate, and can Wes meet the writer rate? Instead, I said, all right, here's actually what we need to do. We need to create IP. Writing is part of that. Here's the value of that. And then that led us to a number that we could agree upon.
Was one thing that you touched on here, and that you also mentioned before the podcast when we were talking with you, you mentioned that in this process of tweaking your offering, there was a lot of whittling going on. You were taking a really big package and you were breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces so that you could get closer and closer to the high value stuff that you were doing. And I don't know in those conversations if it was so much in this particular example that you've just given us, or if it was just a more general part of the process, this whittling. But one thing that we see a lot with our presentation clients is that they have a really hard time whittling their message down because there's this human tendency to want to throw in everything that they know, and so as a result, they end up with this really long, boring presentation because it includes everything that they know, not just the parts that they need to tell people about. Does that make any sense, Alper?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And go ahead.
So I was just wondering, this whittling process that you've mentioned here, and that Wes, that you mentioned here, and that you have described before, this whittling process is generally painful and difficult for these people because they're having to basically throw overboard skills that they've been working on for maybe decades. So I was just wondering, how did you deal with that fear as you're going through this whittling and this refining process?
So when you say whittling, I think about all the different activities that went into building a course at Reforge, then needing to deliver that as a single person.
Yeah.
So like that certainly was an interesting process. There were certain things where I needed to ask the client, like, would you be able to do things like a final editorial review, or could you do, interestingly enough, can you all take care of the visual design so I can focus on just the content and the writing? So a lot of that came out of necessity of, I essentially am doing what we used to take 10 people to do somewhere else as a single person. And so how can I scale down that, all that work to get to, I don't know, basically like the 80-20 of a high quality deliverable. That's what was going on in my mind as I first started out, at least with the course writing product. as we're kind of fast forwarding a little bit here, as we get into kind of what I sell now, somewhere along the way, I dropped writing altogether, at least writing for other people. I obviously still write a newsletter, and I happen to be writing a book as well, but I don't write for other people anymore. And that was difficult. I mean, one thing I didn't mention is that as I was talking to all these people about writing courses for their company, is that I had actually positioned myself and branded myself as quote unquote the executive ghostwriter. And so it's almost like no wonder people were coming to me for with executive a writer, in the back of their mind, right? I wasn't doing a ton of outbound marketing, but I even had people within my network kind of see that that's what I was doing and ask if I could help kind of ghostwrite books that they had been thinking about. And so it became very clear that I needed to rebrand at that point, but maybe we talk about that in the pivot. But it can be hard to toss some of those skills overboard to get down to a slimmer product offering.
I have a question about this story, Matt. Do you mind if I jump in?
No, go ahead.
Speaking of tossing out, Wes, you had that meeting on Friday and you went home for the weekend to go over the proposal, and you met on Monday again and you laid the PVC, the process, the value, and the C was cost. Do I remember correctly?
Cost or compensation. Yeah.
Compensation or cost. Okay. Compensation is a better word. What if they were okay with the point you showed them, the small picture, and said, okay, this is fine, so let's go with this one, slash the price 1/4, half or something like that. Would you be okay with that? Or would your internal conviction about the process, the entire process being right, push you to say, no, this comes as a package, so I cannot omit parts of it?
Great question. Yeah, I think that I wouldn't know how to write them a course without going through the whole process. Okay. And that really was the point that I was trying to get across, is that that we weren't building a course, we were building IP that then got delivered as a course. So it really was, and IP that they could deliver in a lot of different frames beyond a course. Like once we had extracted and synthesized those insights, we could deploy it as, a conference talk, or we can send all kinds of materials that you can create out of novel frameworks and unique domain knowledge. Again, it
could
was
even be used for advertising or marketing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that was basically what they wanted to use it for. But they were so focused on, we want a course. We think this is the right one. How do we find a course writer? And so that was the context that they were coming into. And it was, they were amenable to it. I think it helped that they knew the quality of Reforge courses. And they're like, okay, we can trust that he knows what he's talking about. It was an uphill battle. And it continued to be, as I had this conversation with multiple clients and went through proposals with a lot of different companies that didn't end up as engagements, this ended up being a real uphill conversation. People thinking that they have one deliverable in mind. How do we get that, often at the lowest price? And me having to come in and say, wait, there's a bigger way to do it. And a lot of people don't want to hear that there's like a much larger effort involved.
So Wes, go on with the story. So you've started your business. It's relatively new at this point. You've started to run into customers who maybe there's not a right fit for. Maybe there's a mismatch going on here. So continue on with the story. What happens next in this pivot? Yeah.
So I booked a year's worth of business, which was great, amongst 3 clients. And so those are ones that I was able to get up that hill and like kind of show them my take on the space and how you get to high quality output. But like I just alluded, there were a lot of proposals that I did that went nowhere. That happens when you're out on your own. That's kind of part of the game. But I started seeing patterns in that, and just a lot of people, it was that same conversation of like, what's your hourly rate? Like, that's more than our writers. Like, like this is way more than we had budgeted. And just like time and time again, I was seeing the same thing. It was leading to a lot of ghosting. And so at some point I needed to ask myself, like, well, at some point that all the clients that did convert, they had that added benefit of knowing what all that old work looked like, knowing the high quality output. But at some point, I'm going to run out of those types of clients, and I'm going to need to have this same conversation over and over and over again of how do I get off of this rate discussion. And so I was working with a coach at that time, and that's when it started hitting me of like, okay, I think it's the right time to start thinking about switching, not just the message. Like I told you how I reframed the message, but I think it was time to start thinking about changing my audience, changing my ideal client profile. Which is what I ended up doing.
And tell us a little bit more about that, the early signs of you noticing that, hey, maybe I'm talking to the wrong people here. What were you picking up on that made you start thinking that?
Yeah, I mean, the slide back to the hourly rate discussion was one of the big ones. I think that I can't say that I was seeing the same competitors coming up. It's really hard to know who else they're talking to.
Sure.
But it was a lot of, they wouldn't share full budget numbers, but like, we have this much for new content. If we worked with you, that would basically negate, or that would preclude all the rest of the things that we wanted to do this half,
Yeah.
And so it was that kind of resistance. And you see that 3-4 times, all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's a solid trend that if I'm going to continue down this road, I'm going to have to keep having this conversation.
And then you also mentioned that you were working with a coach at this point. Is this I'm talking to the wrong people, is it something that or that a person could see by themselves, or do they need this external third party to say, hey, you're talking to the wrong people? What are your thoughts on that?
At the time I was 1 year into an independent consulting business. And so I think I was still in this mindset of, well, if I can close another client for the next quarter, then I probably don't need to really dig into this. But it was the coach that was challenging me of, well, what does your next year look like? And, are we talking to the wrong, to the right people, or perhaps the wrong people? The other thing that was coming out was, you talk about kind of pushing some of my skills overboard. Some of the fatigue was setting in about the writing process, and was something that was just not scalable. Again, this was pre-Gen AI, or before Gen AI was very good. But I was realizing that if I continue to have a written output, then that's something that's going to either limit my profitability, or just like really limit the number of people that I can serve. So that all those signs started pointing towards, all right, let's start to think about, where is your unique skill? I was talking about that attic metaphor, like where's your unique skill, and who else could be helped by you operating with that skill. And so that's how we started thinking about new ICPs. It really helped to have someone else as the sounding board there.
Okay. And Alper, I don't want to hog the conversation here. So do you have questions at this point that you want to run by Wes? Go for it.
One almost like a follow-up to what we're talking about. When you decided to do the pivot, can you kind of walk us through the filter that you use? For example, I was taking some notes. I thought about who needed you, who could pay for it, who would act on it. Do these resonate with the new filtering process that you selected, or did you have completely different parameters of your own?
Step one is, where is my special skill? Where is the place where I add the most value? So that I can't remember if we went through an actual exercise with the coach, but we'd certainly had that conversation, and that quickly illuminated that it was that piece of extraction of expertise and synthesis was where my sweet spot was, and where I could scale myself best. So that was kind of the grounding for exploring any new lanes.
Okay, I like that word. Not only your best capability, let's say, but one that you could also scale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The next piece then is, okay, well, so now I know it's this expertise extraction, expertise synthesis, essentially IP development, even though a lot of people don't use that term. All right, well, who could be helped by that? Who needs that kind of support? Before I went down those lanes, I had one more filter that I wanted to put on. I also was feeling a little bit of pain points around consulting for companies in this type of work versus one-on-one engagements. So a lot of the work, as you can imagine, that I just described in IP development is developing a rapport with someone, having them open up and tell stories, dig them up, and kind of frame that into something. That's where the core work is. But if I'm serving a company or a marketing team that is below that CEO, there was a lot of blurred lines that started coming into play. All of a sudden I had 20 stakeholders, as opposed to one. And so sort of thinking about, okay, who needs my help? Where can these engagements be one-on-one? And who are some types of people then that might need this help? So I came up with 3 of them. One was kind of staying in the executive realm, saying maybe these are retired execs or people that want to maybe write a book on the side. I wanted to get away from the writing, but I could help people kind of synthesize their thoughts. That was one. Second one was are people that are still in corporate roles, kind of mid-level managers that are maybe trying to plan their next move or do something on the side. Like maybe they feel like they have a lot of corporate expertise, but they haven't put it down on paper yet. So I thought there was something there. And then the last one was independent consultants, which came from my coach. She said, I work with a lot of independent consultants and a lot of them could help could use some help distilling down their thoughts into something that's more tangible, monetizable, deployable.
Okay. Matt, can I hog for 30 more seconds?
Yeah,
because
going,
I have a follow-up to my follow-up.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so because as Wes talks, I'm taking notes. So how do you measure now to know that the new fit is right for you?
You mean now with
what?
So
you pivoted,
understanding that I went with
you have run through the filter.
Mm-hmm.
Is running through the filter and remaining at the end is the only criterion, or after that, for example, are there measurements that you take to know that, okay, this fit is the right one?
Ah, great. Yeah. So I had those 3 lined up and those 3 potential lanes lined up. And then I did a listening tour. I just found people in my first and second order network and I went and asked them, I'm thinking about designing a service in this realm, kind of tell me what your pain points are. Just had real informal conversations with folks just to hear what's going on in their head. In that, then I started listening to, all right, what are the things that are good about that group and what are the things that will be challenging about that group? What I found that was glaring to me is that working with executives and working with people that are still employed, there was no urgency around doing this kind of expertise synthesis, IP development work. This was almost like a nice to have hobby type thing. Wherein when I talked to independent consultants, it was very specifically like, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about when people ask me what I know. This comes up every sales call that like, yeah, I know that I have 20 years of experience, but how do I talk to someone about that in 30 minutes? Just it became very apparent that there was this need and that it was from people that had, similar to me, had never sold their expertise on their own before. So I also understood the struggle at a personal level in a way that I wouldn't have related to execs. So,
okay, that's great.
And Wes, I've one more question for you. In a few moments, we're going to need to wrap up, and I would really like to hear maybe on a future episode, because with this new group of people, with these independent consultants, you're going to have to do a lot of work to build trust with them because you're an entirely new vertical. So maybe we shouldn't try to do that in like the 2 minutes that we have left on this podcast. So maybe that, should warrant its entire full episode. But I do have one question before we wrap up for today. And that is that there's probably an immense amount of fear, I would imagine, in your case, because you're having to bridge from the familiar. Maybe it's not ideal, but at least they're kind of familiar. You've worked with these people, you're the old crew, your old style business before the pivot. You've worked with these people before in the very early days of your own business and when you were at Reforge, so they're kind of familiar and you know them. And then there's this new group that you have to bridge to. And there's that period where you're kind of jumping over the barrel and you're jumping from the old and familiar to the new group that may or may not work out. Can you just walk us through that a little bit? And that's pretty scary. So just tell us how you dealt with that period.
Yeah, that is certainly a function of me working with a coach. I'll say that first and foremost is that I don't know if I would have had the nerve to take that leap of faith if I was just operating in a vacuum. So working with her really kind of helped me lay out, have a sounding board of the different options. And then when I came to my conclusion, she obviously was very supportive and but it is scary. I mean, just like you were saying, I started turning down requests for proposal. I started closing out my engagements with the corporate clients that had asked for follow-on work. It was very actively walking away from that audience and starting over brand new. And yeah, I could talk forever about how to kind of build authority with a new audience, but no, it's certainly scary. What I will say, and if there are any new independent consultants listening, your first few contracts, your first few engagements will almost certainly come from your warm network. Go after them, take them. You learn so much in those first few, and hopefully it also gives you, like very practically, it gives you a cash buffer so that when you get to this point of decision and needing to niche down, that you can afford to take that kind of risk. I know, without sharing too many specifics, I know having some cash reserve in the bank gave me the confidence to say, all right, if I go down this route of a new audience and I don't get a new client for 3 months, that I can still afford to pay myself. And that just took a lot of the pressure off.
How much runway you have in this startup nomenclature?
Yeah,
exactly.
So you've got some runway. You also have a coach who's helping you walk this process. Any other tips that you would give to somebody who was kind of scared to be making this leap of faith to a new audience? Yeah. Runway, coach, what else? Anything?
I think the biggest one is you have to go out and talk to people. Like, you can sit here and strategize on your own forever, but unless you go out and have conversations and hear in their words what problems they have, it's not really, it won't be validated. You have to go out and make sure that this is something that's real in the market. And ChatGPT won't save you either. It can give you a lot of things to think about. And
it'll be kind to you, but it's not going to solve it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and even I have a product now. It's called the Niche Finder, and it's to help people think about different lanes, and then we go through a viability analysis, and you can do a lot of that through ChatGPT. But the final step is always, okay, now we have to go validate that in the market.
Yeah.
And that also, I mean, that's, I think, where you really have the confidence to say, okay, not only am I hearing that there's an opportunity here, but also I'm getting a preview of the types of people that I'm going to be working with down these lanes. Yeah. And, do I want to continue those kinds of relationships? And it gives you the right amount of signal.
Okay.
Matt, I'm going to challenge our self-imposed limitations on time if Wes has a couple of more minutes, because if I don't ask this question, I think I'm going to wake up at 2 a.m. tonight and I don't want to do that. I want to sleep sound.
Yeah. Wes, go for it.
After this pivot, what is one thing that you stopped doing? For example, is there a line that you don't say anymore or you don't use anymore?
Well, I rebranded, that's for sure. I'm no longer the executive ghostwriter. I guess that was the other thing. Yeah, I changed. You opened this up saying, there's about changing your message and changing your audience, and then I also changed my brand. It really was like a full rebirth on the other side. So now my company is called Develop My IP, which is much more in line. It still requires some education about what I mean by intellectual property, but yeah, it really has changed how I talk about my business, and I certainly don't talk about written deliverables or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Now I can sleep.
Now you can sleep, and that really is the main thing that we want. So,
yes, sleep, sound sleep.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up here, and we definitely, Wes, if you're into it, we would definitely like to bring it back for another episode where we'll spend the entire episode just digging into how you built trust with this new cohort. Are you cool with that?
Yeah, sounds good. No, thanks for letting me share this. I don't think I had ever really shared the full pivot story, so thanks for your patience.
We're honored to be the first place then.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
So thank you very much, and we will see you then. Alper and I will see you at the next episode then.
Yep.
Take care.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
See ya.